Okay, today we're going to talk about some basic table saw setups, adjustments, things like that. If you haven't got a table saw yet, you're looking for one. There's a lot of different types, but there's really only three types. There's the benchtop table saw. I had one of those for years. It worked great. Made a lot of nice things with it. But if you're going to keep it in a workshop, you're going to want to have some sort of a stable base to hold it on. I see contractors, they have it on the floor and they're on their knees running it and on the end of a tailgate of their truck. That's not a good idea, but they know what they're doing. But if you're going to work in a workshop, you're going to want your benchtop saw mounted on some sort of a stable base. The next stuff is the contractor saw. That's what this is. It's on casters. You can wheel it around like this. I share my shop with the cars, so I have to get it out of the way. It's got everything I need. It's got the 3/4 inch slots. It's got an arbor that will accept a dado set. It's got a plate area that's deep enough where you can put your own zero clearance inserts in. That's important. It's got a nice fence. The top one is the cabinet saw. That's going to be pretty much a stationary saw. It's a big, heavy-duty thing. I like my saw here. Does everything I need. I haven't bought a saw yet, and you're still trying to decide. If you're the only person in your household that's going to use a saw, that's one thing. But if there's going to be other people in your household or a neighbor or somebody that's going to use it, I would lean towards one of those moisture sensing saws that kick out. They're so much safer, but it all depends on what you're going to do with it. The things you need for your saw is, you need, like I mentioned, these zero clearance inserts. These are real important. You need to keep the one that came with the saw that has the wide opening in it so you can tilt the 45. But you want to have a zero clearance insert for each blade that you have, so you can run it up in there and you're not dropping things, small pieces in here, and it protects you against a lot of chip out. That's where you need this depth here. You can make your own, and when you try to make these, you can make these on the router table by double stick taping the original to it and routing it out. Also, when you set it on there, it's not going to go down. You're going to have to route a groove in here so your blade will sit on there, and then you want to get it all locked down, and you crank it up and you cut your slot. Have one made for each blade that you have. And when you start making them, make a half a dozen of them extra so you can have them. You don't have to stop and make them. The things you're going to need are push stick. I like this style. You got the heel here to push, but you can also, it holds down the work as you push it through. Your fingers are way away from the blade. There's a thinner one. These are very, very important. I like them. I use them all the time. As you can see, I've cut into this one a little bit. Very handy. You got to have some sort of feather board. I never ever rip without a feather board. I like this magnetic kind. I use it all the time. You want to put it 1 inch or so before the blade. Keeps a nice pressure against the fence, and it also helps against kickback. We'll talk about that in a little bit. This is really a nice one. You can learn how to make one in fine woodworking 224. Got plenty of area to clamp down. Work on this in feed, out feed. It keeps good pressure on the board. These work great on the router table. I've routed some grooves in some big posts and held it very, very secure against the fence. I really like this one. Another very, very important thing is you've got to have some sort of outfeed table. All mine is a cart on wheels. You've got to have a way to push that board through and let it take care of itself. If you don't, you cannot be reaching over. You can't be worrying about it falling. You just got to be able to concentrate on getting it through the blade and let it go from there. You can't have anybody on the other end grabbing it. That doesn't work. You've got to have some sort of outfeed table. When you get a new saw, used saw, you have to make sure everything's adjusted correctly. We'll go through that now. First thing you want to do is check to make sure that the blade is in line with the miter slot. Everything references off the miter slot. You've got to have the blade parallel with it. Read your owner's manual. If the owner's manual isn't around, you don't have it. My manual says to use a combination square, run it up to a tooth, pick a tooth, touch it, and then go up here with the same tooth, touch it again. I find this kind of clumsy, plus you're metal on metal. I don't like that. I think this is a better idea. Come up here and find the leading tooth, rub it. There you are. My book says you can be within 15 thousandths. I think that's too much. I think you're going to have trouble with burning and binding if you go 15 thousandths. If you have to adjust it, your manual will tell you how to do it. If you don't have a manual, if you look underneath, you can see how it's all bolted together. You'll see what to do, but loosen it, snug them up a little, and take a stick and a hammer and knock it just a little bit, tighten it up, check it again. It's very important. The way I do it, there's my clamp. I use the indicator, get it set where you want, clamp it down, take the same tooth over, touch it again. Mine's within a thousandths. It was right on when I got it brand new 12 years ago. My wife bought me this saw. I checked everything right away. It was perfect. You want to make sure that your fence, that's all you got to do about the saw blade. If you want to check your fence, that's the next thing. You want the fence, one of two things. You either want it parallel, or you want it towed out just a little bit. I keep mine towed out just a little bit. What's a little bit? Mine's 10 thousandths, that's fine. If it's parallel, that's fine, but I like it out a little bit. I think it gives a little bit of a freer cut. You do not want it this way, or you're going to have binding and burning. See, I got 10 thousandths right there. That's what I think is about perfect. My owner's manual says to check the fence by putting it over to your miter slot and eyeballing it. I know your eye can see 10,000s, but I don't agree with that method. I don't think it's accurate. You want to check your blade for 90. I have to have a light behind me when I do it. There's your check. You have a stop here that'll stop you at 90 and a stop at 45. You can check your 45. Don't worry too much about the stops. I more or less get it close and then I check it. And lock it down, then check it, because when you lock it, it moves. You have a good square. You got to have a good quality combination square. Another thing you want to check is your splitter. You have to be in line with your splitter and the blade. It has to be right on. We'll get into that later. When you go to set the miter gauge, you can check it off the blade if you want. That works fine. What I like to do is, you can make one of these. Strip of wood, piece of MDF. Have it a little wider, run it through. Now you've got the perfect reference to your miter slot. Now you've got a real nice flat surface to check. Much easier. You can also use this if it was a little longer and check your fence. Now we're going to talk about some kickback. You don't want that. If you understand what it is, you can prevent it. What kickback is, when you're ripping a board and the board comes away from the fence onto the blade, what's going to happen is, as the board comes up, this saw blade is going to throw it back. That's where your splitter comes in handy. It keeps the board away from the blade when you're ripping. You can prevent the kickback with your, like I showed you earlier, with the feather board. Okay, you got the tension here, it's going to hold it from kicking back, but if you keep your splitter on these claws, once you get up there, it's going to grab it and won't let it come back at you. We'll talk about some saw blades here. Many different types of saw blades. You can do everything you want with a combination blade. Rip, cross cut, but it is a compromise blade. There are certain situations where it's not good. I used a combination blade for a long time with everything and it worked great, but occasionally I'd get into some hardwoods and stuff and it'd burn on me, and I just knew I had to make a change. Besides a combination blade, you should have a rip blade. It's all in the deep gullets, the grind, tooth geometry. Allows a much freer, cleaner cut when you're ripping. It's not going to cross cut for you, but for ripping, this is the way to go. If you do a lot of plywood work, a nice plywood blade. I think this is 80 teeth. Yeah, 80 teeth. Again, geometry and the grind is going to give you a beautiful cut in plywood. My combination blade does real nice in plywood, but again, you know, it's nice to have a nice plywood blade. The two types, thin curve, full curve. I think there's a 30-second difference. They say a thin kerf works better on the low-powered saws. This I think is 1.5 horsepower, and I put a full kerf saw on, blade on, and it works just fine, no problems. I don't know if you, I like, you know, you can store your blades any way you want. I like this. It's old LP jackets. Cut them down a little bit. They work perfect. You can, they work great for thin kerf blades, but not for full kerf. But that's what I like to store my blades. I don't like them hanging on the wall. A nice dado set. This is a real inexpensive set, but it works great for everything I need. I don't do dados that often, but they do come in real handy. I gotta tell you, there's a, you can put the blade on wrong. Of course, backwards, yeah, but this is something I learned the hard way. When you go to tighten your blade, that's it. You want to tighten it up, get it snug, that is it. If you tighten it any more than that, you will not get that nut off. When this saw starts, it's got that jerk sensation there, and it's self-tightening, and it will tighten up so tight that you cannot get it off. If that's the case, you gotta figure something out, whether you do some vice grips or something. But a couple different things you can do. By the way, before I forget, these clamps are great for a third hand, but that's all they're good for. They really don't have much use in my shop. I spent a whole afternoon trying to put drawer faces on drawers, and it took me a while to figure out that every time you clamp this, it pushes out of alignment. It's just the way they work. They're great for a third hand, but if you want to clamp something and have it stay there, forget it. They drive you nuts. How do you take care of the saw blades? Well, you can buy all kinds of fancy chemicals and all that stuff and cleaners, but this stuff works great. You buy it at the grocery store. Dump some in there. Put the blade in. This is a plastic thing for pots out in the yard. You can buy it at the garden center. Toothbrush, or if you really want to get fancy, a brass brush. Let it soak for 5 minutes. They clean up just beautiful with this. Rinse it off really good, dry it really good, and you're all set. You got to keep that pitch off of the teeth or you'll overheat. I got off track here, but my favorite way to reinforce a picture frame is right here. I cut that groove across. I glue it up first, and then clean it up good, and then I take this on the router table, set it up against the fence on the router table, and run it across the bit, put the groove in there. That makes a super, super strong miter. Sorry about all the walking around. In my last video, I talked about cross-cutting, and I showed this little jig I made. I gotta confess, it didn't work out so well after all. I had to remove that plywood strip. Such drastic changes in here with humidity, it was always loose, so I put on one of these aluminum bars that has the adjustable little things in here, and it stays tight all the time. So when you cross cut, here's my favorite clamp again here. When you cross cut a board, you want to make multiple cuts. Here you go. Well, if you think that's too much hanging out, you can also use this for a stop. Cut it, but you cannot do this. You can't use this and this at the same time. What's going to happen is it's going to get through the cut and it's going to bind. This thing's going to come over and it's going to fly up at you. Whenever you're cross cutting, you have to use one or the other. You have to use this. If you want to use a fence, you got to use a stop here. So once you clear it, it's free to fall off. Very important. Another thing I have trouble with is when you're working off of a drawing or your own drawing and you've got everything written out in fractions. I can't work with fractions. I can add a 1/4 inch and a 1/2 inch, but that's about it. I've changed everything to a decimal. Everything has to be changed to a decimal. 1/4 inch is 250 thousandths, 1/2 inch 500 thousandths, 3/8 375, 5/16 312 1/2. You can add up decimals. You can add them, subtract them, divide them, whatever you want to do. Very easy. How do you get decimals? Well, you can get the little chart here. Go through your drawing and write it out in decimals. If you don't know, if you don't have a chart, you don't need a chart. Just take the bottom into the top. 5/8, 5 divided by 8, 0.625. Trust me, you're gonna, if you start using decimals, you're gonna be happier. It's fractions, you can, you make mistakes too easy, but you start running everything in decimals, it's just gonna be so much easier for you to figure out what you need to do if you're working on tenons and door frames. And trust me, unless you're a lot better at math than I am, decimals are the way to go. 6-inch calipers, I find these very, very handy to keep in the shop. You know, your planing, I mean, you can, this is how you want to measure if you want exact dimensions for planing. You know, you can hold your scale up there or whatever, but I use these all the time. You can check the depth of your tenons and check the depth of your mortise. You can check anything, you know, check your depth here. You can check them this way. They're super handy. Get a good pair. I like the dial myself. Keep them around in the shop. They're really nice. I really like them. I guess the only thing else I can talk about is working safely. You can see I don't use my guard. I recommend you use your guard. I don't use it. I like to see what's going on. That's not an excuse. That's just the way I am. The splitter, leave the splitter on. We talked about the kickback. This will help you with that. These will stop that board from coming at you. Keep your splitter on. You have to take it off for grooves, dados, stuff like that, but otherwise, if you're ripping, cross-cutting, keep your splitter there. That's what it's there for. One thing you want to watch out for is don't clutter up your saw with parts and clamps and tools, because the next thing you know, something's going to start falling off and you're going to go to grab it and you get in trouble. If you respect the saw and know that it can hurt you, you're going to be good. Yeah, I've cut myself, but anybody who's ever been hurt on a saw, it's been their fault. It's been my fault. I've done something wrong. You just got to be careful and think about what you're doing. Be extra careful with production. If you got to run 10 or 15 pieces all the same, that's where you're going to get hung up. You're going to be cutting along here, and next thing you know, you're having an accident. So production runs, you have to really focus and pay attention. Don't work when you're tired. Make sure your boards are good. You can't send a twisted, warped up piece of junk board through here. It's going to grab and catch and twist. Make sure the lumber is right. I guess that's about it. If you take your time, read your instructions, learn the saw, pay attention to what you're doing, you're going to be fine. I hope everybody has a good time with their tools and respects them and takes care of them. Good luck to everybody, and thanks for watching.